title of today's message is God is with you even when you feel stuck. Now, just like previous weeks, we're in this series, I think it's going through Acts, and we're doing exactly the same as the kids are doing in kids' church. So what we're talking about this morning, they're actually learning in kids' church as well, which is so cool because we just heard this other week of a mum who went home, sat down at the lunch table, and she and the kids were talking about what they learned in kids' church, and we have spoken about the same thing in here. So just great that we can pull it through all generations. We do have a little story we're going to try to look at, and I'm saying that because we've got problems with technology this morning, but let's see how far we go. She does it so well, this girl, but if it fails, then I'll just have to tell you the story. But you can read for yourself in Acts 12, verse 1 to 9, and it's about Peter's imprisonment and his miraculous rescue from that place. Let's try.
Hi everyone, I'm Erica. During this time, King Herod ruled over Judea. He was Jewish, but served the Roman government. And just like the Jewish religious leaders, he wanted to stamp out the Jesus movement. Herod even arrested the Apostle James and had him killed. When Herod saw how much this pleased the religious leaders, he sent soldiers to arrest Peter too. Now, Herod had seen strange things happen among the believers, like when Peter and the other apostles had been arrested before, they had mysteriously turned up back in the temple courts. Herod was not taking any chances. He had Peter chained up between two guards with two more guards at the door. 4 separate groups of soldiers were assigned the job. Herod made plans to bring Peter out for a big public trial right after the Passover festival. But while Peter was stuck in prison, the other believers didn't give in to despair. Day and night, they prayed to God.
Please, Jesus, save Peter.
You alone have the power to free him.
The night before Peter was to be put on trial, he managed to sleep. I don't know how. This cannot have been comfortable. All chained up? As Peter slept, an angel appeared, and light blazed in the dark cell. Apparently, this wasn't enough to wake Peter, because the angel struck him on the side to wake him up.
What? I'm awake. Quick, get up.
And just like that, the chains fell off Peter's wrists.
Put on your clothes and sandals. Put on your coat. Follow me.
Peter did exactly as the angel said, but the whole time, he was convinced that he was dreaming. They passed the first set of guards, and then a second set of guards, but no one seemed to notice them at all. When Peter and the angel arrived at the heavy iron bars leading into the city, the gate opened, seemingly all by itself. Peter followed the angel right out of the prison and down the street. When they reached the end of the street, the angel disappeared. Peter
Oh, well, we got further than I thought we would get. So what happened, Peter all of a sudden realized that he was awake. This is no dream. He's standing on the street, free from chains. So he walked immediately to the house of Mary, yes, I think Mark's mother, where the believers, the church, were praying for him. And he knocked on the door, and no one opened, and he knocked again as loud as he possibly could. And then a servant girl named Rhoda came, and she stood at the door, and she said, "Who is it?" Remember what's happening to these Christians, they're scared. And when Peter said, "It's me, Peter," she recognized his voice, and she didn't open the door. She was just so overjoyed, she turned around and ran back to the others and said, "Peter, it's Peter, he's at the door." And then someone says, "No, you're crazy. It's probably his angel." Now, that was some strange Jewish belief I seem to remember from my research. It's his angel. And she said, "No, I'm telling you, it's him." And so she went back, and Peter kept on knocking. and opened the door, and there he was. And they couldn't believe it. And I'm wondering, yeah, I guess I wouldn't believe it, even though they were praying, "Save Peter, Lord." And here he was, God saved him. So Peter told them everything that happened, and then he left them. So that's where we're going to leave the story. If you want to, you can read further and find out what happened to Herod. Quite interesting. So we're looking specifically at Acts 12, verse 1 to 9. And I'm going to read to you from the New King James Version, just verse 1. Now about that time, Herod the king stretched out his hand to harass some of the church. And I had to think, what would his motives be to harass these people from the church? Now, we're going to go into a bit of history, and I know that history lessons can drive some people to distraction, but I'm going to try and keep it short and interesting. So the first reason seems to be that Herod Agrippa I, the first one, he was the grandson of Herod the Great, who was king when Jesus was born. He had an identity crisis. He had something to prove. He wanted to find favors from the Jews, because the Herods were not actually born Jews. They were what they called proselyte Jews. Herod the Great married Marianne, a Jewish lady, and that's how they converted to Judaism. And even though these proselytes, whomever they were regarded as legitimate Jews in many things, they had some serious limitations, especially for those who aspired to be king over the Jews. According to Jewish law, only a full-blooded Jew could be king. Some even went as far as to call Herod an illegitimate usurper. Is that the right word? He was trying desperately to find favor with the Jews. And there was some division among the Jews at this stage. And he decided to use it to his own advantage. So we heard in that story, when he had James killed, he saw how much it pleased the Jews. And that's why he went for the big prize, Peter. It was also a political move. Last week we looked at Peter's visit to Cornelius, a Gentile. And the Jewish community, after what happened there, they were stirred up. And why? Because of circumcision. Now, what has circumcision to do with Peter's visit to Cornelius? Well, up to this stage, everyone, all the Gentiles who got saved by the good news of Jesus, they knew about this Jewish law about all males being circumcised. So they just went with it. Okay, it's that. If that's what we need to do to be saved, we'll do it. And everyone lived in harmony, or so it seemed. But God wasn't happy. This was not a rule that he brought in. So he gave Peter a vision, and he told Peter, you can eat anything. Nothing is unclean. And circumcision doesn't matter to me. Anyone can be saved, no matter what their diet is, no matter whether they're circumcised or not. And so Peter baptized Cornelius and his whole household without them having to be circumcised. And Jerusalem was stirred up about this. And when we look at the third motivation for Herod's devious acts, we have to realize that there's some dark, bigger, deep power at work here. Jesus told us that the thief does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. So if we read about what the Herods did, there's no doubt that there were more than political reasons or identity crisis reasons why they were doing what they were doing. They were all killing. Herod the Great, he had all baby boys under the age of 2 killed. If you remember, Mary and Joseph had to flee to Egypt. Herod Antipas was his son, Herod the Great's son. He had John the Baptist beheaded. And now Herod Agrippa I, he had an agenda to start killing off all the apostles. So there's no doubt in my mind that spiritual forces of darkness are at work here, desiring to keep the kingdom from God to spreading throughout the world. Just imagine the severe setback that this new Christian movement would have if they had to lose that. They've lost James. Now, if they had to lose Peter as well at this point, and how devastating would it have been if the doctrine of circumcision was actually taken further and they stood upon that. For someone to be saved, all males had to be circumcised. That would have really not been good for the spreading of the gospel. So yes, our enemy was trying his best, as he is today. We just heard there, the battle belongs to the Lord. We know that this battle we have here, there's a spiritual realm where there's a real battle going on. So what can we learn from this story of Peter? What can we learn today? We can look at the power of prayer. Everett Harrison, in his commentary about this section in the Bible, said this: "The circumstances surrounding Peter's imprisonment are sketched in simple but dramatic fashion. The power of an earthly monarch pitted against the power of prayer to the Almighty." Note verse 5. Acts 12, verse 5. I'm going to read from 3 different versions. NIV says, "So Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him." King James Version says, "But prayer was made without ceasing of the church unto God for him." And the New King James Version, "But constant prayer was offered to God." Friends, I believe that this is the key to the whole passage. Constant prayer without ceasing, earnestly praying. This is next level prayer, what is also called intercessory prayer. Now Luke, who wrote the book of Luke, we believe he's also the writer of the book of Acts. In the original Greek, the word that is used for this prayer is ektonos. Luke uses it another time where he talks about Jesus praying in Gethsemane. Luke 22 verse 44 says, "His sweat became like great drops of blood falling to the ground." This is not our ordinary prayers that you and I pray every day. This is next level prayer, intercessory prayer. Do you know the power of prayer? We have a plaque on our wall just outside our bedroom where we can see it every day. Actually, I don't notice it every day anymore. I should look at it more. It says, "Prayer changes things." Now, I know that is true. Do you know it? Do you know that prayer changes things? I want to tell you something about prayer, or the lack of prayer, and this is an account of a time in our life when I was young. For my family, that was a very, very dark time. So while I'm not going to go into detail, some of what I'm going to say may trigger some people. And if you feel triggered, we're talking here about praying and praying together. So please don't try and do it alone. There are people in the room who would be on the lookout for anyone leaving. Please stay and have them pray with you. When I was 19, and my sisters were 17 and 14 respectively, my mum was the victim of a violent attack by an extended family member. Just trying to calm down. This had such a profound effect on our family. We had to go for family therapy. Can't remember much about that time. But the saddest thing is that in those days, these things were not talked about. I'm pretty sure that no one in church knew about what we were going through, what my mum was going through, my dad. Family members were kept in the dark. I tried, as a 19-year-old who was studying psychology, I think when I got to the third family member who shut me down, I was shut down. I couldn't talk about it. Everything was just swept under the carpet. And looking back now, I can clearly see the long-term effect that sweeping under the carpet, that quietness, had done to our family. Mum suffered from severe depression, and her and Dad's relationship never completely recovered. I can just thank the Lord that they're both with Him now and they're free from all that pain. I know that both my sisters had to go for counselling later in their lives for seemingly unrelated stuff, and this came up. So I didn't know I was going to react this way this morning, but obviously it still has an effect on me. But the question I'm left with is how different it would have been, and I'm so sure of that, it would have been different if we had people praying for us, if we had people interceding and supporting us. Sometimes things happen to us that are so great and insurmountable that we can't seem to breathe, let alone pray. And it is in times like these when we need others to pray with us. So who can we trust? Just going back to Peter's circumstances, we read in verse 6, the night before Herod was to bring him to trial, Peter was sleeping between two soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. He was under maximum security. He was on death row, and he was sleeping? I don't know about you, but I don't think I would have been sleeping. Despite everything I just told you, I'm human. Even the blazing light, and I'm sure that angel talked to him, nothing woke him. Well, maybe I'm just a light sleeper, but when I'm asleep in my comfortable bed at home, if a light turns on, I'm awake. Someone talks to me, I'm awake. I'm awake instantly. I'm not awake 2 seconds later because I sort of sleepwalk, but that's what I'm awake. But the angel had to strike Peter in the side, and by strike, it's probably a good hit. He wasn't just lightly prodded in the side. And then he still thought he was dreaming. How could Peter have slept so soundly, being in those circumstances? How? The answer I have is that Peter trusted God completely. And when you trust that God is in control, he knew that either God was going to rescue him from this situation, or he was going to be prosecuted, or he was going to die the next day after the Passover. Whatever was going to happen, Peter knew, God knew, and God loved him. So he was at peace. There have been times in my life, and I'm sure all of you have had these times, where I found either myself or a loved one in dire circumstances. There are many examples I can use, but I can specifically remember 2 separate occasions where our children there were just stuff happening to them that was so dark and evil, and we could do nothing to help them. I don't think there's anything worse for a parent than knowing that their child is suffering and they can do nothing. Have you ever felt so completely helpless and even worthless that all you could do was fall on your knees and cry, God, God? Have you felt, have you heard in that moment, have you sensed with your whole being how the Holy Spirit comes and intercedes? You hear the groaning because you don't have words, but you hear and you feel and you sense the Holy Spirit pouring out your prayers at the foot of the heavenly throne, interceding to the Father with your prayers that you don't even know the words for. Have you felt it? Have you experienced it? On some of those occasions, I've even called in the big guns, the human intercessors, people sitting in this church to pray with us. Now, Titus and I were praying. A friend was living with us at that stage. She was a big support in praying. But I went that extra step and I asked others to pray. There's no condemnation. There's no condemnation. And that made such a huge difference. In one of these situations, there was a miraculous turnabout. Miraculous. It just couldn't have happened without God. Prayer changes things. What about life? The life we live today. We all know that life happens to us while we're making other plans. I was just told earlier, the video doesn't work. I thought, oh well, we made plans, it didn't work. Sunlight of happiness can change in a flash into darkness of despair. Something we counted on is denied us. Around us are those utterly uninterested in goodness and truth who seem to prosper. We don't understand this. What shall we do? I can tell you one thing. If we dwell on such things, it can become the stuff of bitterness and despair. C.S. Lewis said, "Look for yourself, and you will find in the long run hatred, loneliness, despair, rage, ruin, and decay. But look for Christ, and you will find him, and with him everything else thrown in." What I believe that means is that we can do everything with Jesus at our side. He never leaves us. I'm going to invite the worship team to come up. We're going to end the sermon, but I have one more story with the hymn, "Great is Thy Faithfulness," because no matter what, God is always faithful. And then I want to invite you, anyone who wants prayer this morning, if you're suffering, if you If there's something going on for you, you don't even have to tell us what it is. God knows. There are people waiting and willing to pray with you. So please don't do it on your own. Last story about the faithfulness of God. It's in the Ukraine. And the horrible shelling and the war is going on. It's Christmas Day. And despite numerous promises of a ceasefire, the shelling is just continuing. It's just continuing. One reporter was downtown when the horrid sounds of the shelling died down. He said this: I was suddenly arrested because from several directions, from several churches, I heard people singing Christmas carols. That's the spirit to take into the future with us. Trust in God and don't quit. So my encouragement to you today is trust in God, keep on praying, ask for prayer, and never, ever give up.